Promoting abortion? President Joe Biden proposes more funding and a directive aimed at colleges. We're at the White House. Catholic voters. What factors are influencing the faithful ahead of next month's elections? See the results of the latest Real Clear Politics EWTN News poll. Withstanding the storm. A church building survival offers hope amid recovery from Hurricane Ian. And maritime ministry. How Pope Francis is honoring a special apostolate's milestone anniversary. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, October 4th, 2022. Thank you so much for being with us tonight on this feast of St. Francis. I'm Tracy Sabol. The White House announces 2 new steps to promote abortion. It is all part of Democrats' overall strategy to drive voters to the polls next month and push back on pro-lifers' historic achievements in saving lives and protecting the most vulnerable. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, good evening to you. Today, President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris held what the White House calls the Task Force on Reproductive Health Care Access. Among those in attendance, the Secretaries of Health and Human Services, Education, and Veterans Affairs. And they're doing everything in their power to deny what pro-lifers are fighting for every day, protecting the unborn.
Months after the Supreme Court sent Roe v. Wade back to the states, in the White House press briefing room today,
the president and vice president are doing everything in their power to protect women seeking abortion, their right to travel to states that provide care, their right to medication and contraception, and their right to patient privacy.
Ahead of today's task force meeting, the White House Gender Policy Council unveils this. The Department of Health and Human Services is announcing more than $6 million in new Title X grants and other grants to protect and expand access to reproductive health care. In response, Susan B. Anthony, Pro-Life America, tweets, 100 days after the SCOTUS-Dobbs decision, 24 states are set to save 200,000 babies from abortion death per year. But today, Biden will announce he's sending $6 million of your tax dollars to promote abortion on demand until the moment of birth. Priorities. And as the battle to save lives continues, this tweet today from National Right to Life, offering encouragement to those on the front lines. This is a critical time in the life of the pro-life movement, a time when advocates for life must be more persuasive and courageous than ever before. It is likely that all of us have struggled to overcome the damage caused by an anti-life culture.
Also tonight, Planned Parenthood is opening up a mobile abortion clinic in the state of Illinois, and one pro-life supporter called that another grotesque demeaning of human life. Meanwhile, President Biden and First Lady Jill Biden head to Florida tomorrow for an up-close look at the damage and devastation caused by Hurricane Ian. Just yesterday, they were in Puerto Rico. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
And nearly a week after Hurricane Ian smashed into Florida, hundreds of thousands of people are still without power. That makes it hard for families to prepare food and keep cool on hot, humid days. Ian's strong winds and storm surge originally knocked out power to 2.6 million customers across Florida. State officials say they expect electricity to be restored by Sunday for those customers whose power lines are still intact.
Storms, like any natural disaster, bring out the very best and sometimes the very worst in people. But I will tell you that so far, people have been very, very kind and warm.
Hurricane Ian also damaged more than half of the schools in places like Lee County, Florida, making it hard for students to resume classes. The search crews say they have rescued more than 2,000 people across Florida, and the search for survivors grows more desperate by the minute. Some areas that got the worst of Hurricane Ian are now unlivable. Hurricane Ian's winds combined with a storm surge chewed through homes and businesses in Fort Myers Beach, Florida.
Massive devastation, something somewhat used to. My first deployment actually was Hurricane Katrina, so seen a lot of hurricanes over the years. This certainly is a big big disaster.
Jennifer Brown is a canine search specialist with Florida Task Force 2. Her dogs, Fierce and Fame, are searching for human remains on Fort Myers Beach. They have worked dozens of missions since Florida's Task Force 2 first arrived at Fort Myers Beach as the storm was still pounding the community.
It was a good day. You know, I mean, again, it's like you don't want to leave anybody behind. That's what we're here for. But then on the other hand, we didn't find anybody else. It's a good thing.
A team of 80 from this task force has been busy crisscrossing a 7-mile stretch on the beach, working 24/7, going house to house in search of survivors.
We found a lot of residents who are still sheltering in place, who need some info, need some help just getting out, or just where to get water, ice, food, and just giving that information to them is a huge help for them.
It's no easy task given the scene here. Homes crumbled, smashed, and stacked on top of others, businesses blown to pieces. One building was moved across the street by the sheer power of the wind and water.
We had about 60 medical calls, medical emergencies that we responded to, with 2 people who actually went into cardiac arrest, stopped breathing, and those search and rescue personnel ended up performing CPR, able to get a pulse back and get them transported to a local hospital.
The team rescued this elderly couple who were trapped in their home. The storm had washed away the entire ground floor of their 2-story house. There's no power or water in this area, so anyone still at the beach is completely cut off from services. The search and rescue team has been using high water vehicles and front loaders to navigate through the debris as they continue to search for anyone trapped in the rubble. Task Force 2 has found human remains but did not say how many bodies they have recovered. Some Florida churches provide shelter to storm victims who lost their homes.
I'm guessing 25% of our people have lost their home.
Pastor Robert Caiston says people who fled to his church had to be careful because the water started covering the floor and almost reached the altar.
It was just like Noah's Ark. You didn't know how high the water was going to come. When it started coming in, we didn't know when it was going to stop. We were up on our pulpit in the church.
Jane Compton says the church's steeple came crashing down, but it didn't hurt anyone. She is one of the people now living in the church because it is the only home she has now. Japan's leader condemns North Korea's latest missile launch today. Prime Minister Fumio Kishida also spoke with President Joe Biden to plan both an immediate and longer-term response. This is the first missile in 5 years to fly over Japan, forcing alarms and evacuation notices. Meanwhile, South Korea and the U.S. conducted Air Force drills. The weapon, which the North fired, could carry a nuclear warhead with a range that could reach Guam. In Ukraine, an Orthodox Church was destroyed last weekend during battles in the village of Dolina. Ukraine says it is now in control of that area in Donetsk, one of 4 regions which Russia recently claimed to annex. In Moscow, Russia's defense chief says 200,000 reservists are now part of a mobilization which launched 2 weeks ago. The recruits are now training for deployment to Ukraine. Military analysts are trying to predict what moves Russia may make in an effort to stop recent Ukrainian advances. Coming up, faith and politics. A new poll reveals what factors are influencing Catholics ahead of next month's elections. Plus, atonement and worship. Judaism celebrates its holiest day. We continue by, again, looking at the Catholic vote in exclusive polling from EWTN News and Real Clear Opinion Research. Tonight, the issues important to Catholic voters and some startling statistics over what Catholics believe. The poll found only 50% of Catholics surveyed believe in the real presence of the Eucharist. Also, 50% of Catholics surveyed say they never go to confession. Once again, we are joined by Matthew Bunson, Executive Editor and Washington Bureau Chief for EWTN News, Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief of Real Clear Politics, and on Skype, Susan Crabtree, White House and National Political Correspondent for Real Clear Politics. Carl, let's start with you. Can you give us a recap of this poll?
Well, we asked, a lot of questions. Do Catholics want Joe Biden to run again? In a word, no. Where are they on what's the most important issue? It's not immigration, it's not abortion, it's not education, it's the economy. And these were large numbers. And but we also asked a series of cultural issues, where Catholics are on some of these culture war issues that tear us apart on Capitol Hill, where we are now. And one of the most interesting was education. This is something Matthew he's intensely interested in. If only 2% of people rate education the top issue in the country, but when you get into these issues that are dividing us, it's not necessarily good news for the Democrats. Did pandemic hurt? Did the lockdowns hurt learning? Yeah, 3/4 of Catholic voters said, yeah, they did. Should parents have a role in teaching their kids, a role in the curriculum? And remember this, in the Virginia governor's race, you remember Terry McAuliffe, who's a solid politician and really should have known better, said no, sided with the teachers union. Glenn Youngkin sided with the parents. We know how that came out. Well, in our poll, about 2/3 of Catholic voters think parents should have a say in their curriculum. So there were some interesting findings.
Yeah, and if you have school-age children, like many of us do here at EWTN, you know really how crucial that was during that time. So that's very interesting, very interesting. Susan, I'm going to go to you now. Education is a worry for many Catholics. What does this poll reveal about the most pressing concerns for parents when it comes to schools?
Well, I thought it was interesting that they are very concerned. There's a wide consensus when it comes to whether biological boys who identify as girls should be competing against biological girls on school sport teams. By an overwhelming 63%, the Catholic voters strongly oppose this idea. And when it comes to CRT, critical race theory being taught in the classroom, again, a very strong message from the Catholic voters saying 51.9% believe that this should not be taught in the classroom, that this is something that only 11% of Catholic voters really endorse and support. So I think that is showing that when it comes, even though a majority of the people we polled for the Catholic voters were Democrats, it was by a little margin compared to Republicans, they still oppose and when it comes to these big divisive cultural issues, they're siding on more of a conservative end of the debate.
Yeah, absolutely. And Matthew, I want to go to you now. We always track where Catholics stand on devotional and sacramental practices. Yes. Let's talk a little bit more about that and what this latest poll found when it came to the real presence and confession.
Well, we have been finding consistent numbers throughout our polling of Catholic voters, and that is that 50% of Catholics believe in the real presence. That is abysmally low. It tracks in some ways with what we're finding with Mass attendance, that about 24% of Catholics go to Mass at least weekly, only 1% go daily. But then we get into the numbers of those who go to confession, for example. The numbers there are really rather depressing, that only about 50% never go to confession within the Catholic community. So sacramental practice is a major challenge for us as a church, but again, we've talked a lot about that, the disparity between those who attend Mass on a regular basis and those who don't is a predictor of how they're going to vote. So if we look at those numbers, we can go back to the question politically that those who attend Mass on a regular basis do not approve of Joe Biden in very strong numbers, whereas those who do not attend regularly really tend to approve him, but again, at a lower rate, like 75 to in the low 50s in terms of negative among Catholics who attend Mass, in the low 50s among those who don't. So it's really important for us as a church to do two things. One is to know how Catholics are attending Mass and whether they are or not, but then how they're actually living out their lives in faith on the basis of that.
Yeah, I'm curious, did those numbers surprise you at all?
No. Again, they're consistent with what we've seen. And from that standpoint, it's a very powerful lesson, but it's also a lesson, I think, for both parties to understand as they're trying to find a way to bring in enough Catholic votes to make a significant difference, especially in this campaign.
Yeah, most definitely. Carl, I want to go to you now. I know you're really a keen observer of politics and culture. How are cultural concerns for Catholics, how are they intersecting with political choices in this election?
Well, you know, Tracy, that's fascinating because Joe Biden's the second Roman Catholic president. He gets no credit for that with Catholics or, frankly, secular reporters who like him on the left, you know. And this is something that if we take a step back and we think not about these issues that divide us for a minute and issues that unite us. I was alive when John F. Kennedy was president. He got every Catholic vote, and because Catholics didn't think Americans would vote for a Catholic. Well, they do now, and it's almost as though Catholic voters are free to reject a Catholic politician or embrace him. And so, taking a step back, the good news, overall good news in this poll is that people are looking at the issues. And they're saying, okay, I agree with this guy or I don't, but they're not strictly voting for that. And that's what John F. Kennedy promised America would happen, that you'd have a Catholic president would follow his conscience, maybe listen to the Pope, maybe listen to his parish priest, but he would, in the end, behave like any other American. And that's happened.
Yeah. For sure. And Susan, I want to get back out to you. You know, we really can't forget about the most pressing issue for Catholics and most Americans that this survey found, that is inflation and the economy. Will this election hang on to that, or are there other issues you think that could determine who wins?
Well, certainly most Americans, it's the #1 issue, inflation and the economy. And according to this poll, the people that we talked to did not think that the Inflation Reduction Act was going to have any kind of impact on inflation and the state of the economy. And they're very, very concerned. A lot of them said that it was affecting them directly. The inflation, the 9% increase that we've seen in recent months and the price of consumer goods is directly impacting their livelihood, their way of life. And so I think that, when it comes, that's very, very significant. And you only had 10% saying that abortion was the #1 issue. You do have Democrats hoping that they can mobilize voters like they did in Kansas, and it was kind of a surprise a few months ago when voters rejected this anti-abortion effort in Kansas to change their constitution. I think we have yet to see how this will impact, but when it comes to Catholic voters, their mind is focused on the economy and inflation.
Almost out of time, but Matthew, really quickly, what can we expect in our last poll?
Well, we're going to be zeroing in on the key issues as we're just going to be days away from the election. One of those is the question of abortion and how that's going to play out among Catholic voters. 87% of Catholics want some form of limitation on abortion. Is the Democrat message going to resonate with them in some fashion in terms of those who favor abortion, as we have seen, unfortunately, within the Catholic population? But we keep coming back to those economic numbers, the inflation numbers, and we'll see what over the next few weeks those numbers actually look like when these reports come out of employment and inflation. So a lot to unpack yet, and we can look forward to that in our third and final poll.
Most definitely. Thank you all again for being here. We really appreciate it. Up next, see how a new film about care for creation stars the Holy Father. Plus, an archaeological discovery which is truly a buried treasure. Pope Francis is recognizing the ministry of Stella Maris. Its World Congress is meeting in Glasgow this week for a belated celebration of their 100th anniversary. Stella Maris serves those who work on waterways around the world. Today marks the holiest day of the year in Judaism. Yom Kippur, also known as the Day of Atonement, begins at sundown on October 4th. According to Jewish tradition, the day is a chance to wipe the slate clean of any wrongs committed over the past year. Jews who observe Yom Kippur will fast, repent, and worship from sundown Tuesday until the end of nightfall on Wednesday. St. Francis is not just the patron saint of animals, but also of ecology. To mark today's feast day, a new documentary was presented at the Vatican today. EWTN Vatican Bureau Chief Andreas Tannhauser had the opportunity to talk to the director of the movie, Nicholas Brown.
We're here at St. Peter's Square, and joining me now is award-winning director Nicholas Brown, who presented his new movie, The Letter, at the Vatican. Nicholas, this movie is inspired by Laudato Si, the encyclical of Pope Francis. Can you tell us a little bit more about your new movie?
The movie is based on the encyclical that the Pope wrote. Really, it began for me as a dialogue between faith and science. I'm a science filmmaker. I'm not a Catholic, but I'm very interested in the environment. That's my personal truth. And when I was presented with the opportunity of making a film about the Laudato Si, I found this just the most fascinating subject ever, that faith and science could meet together at a time of crisis, a global crisis that we all feel and see today.
How do you see Pope Francis, and how was your interaction with him also working on that movie?
Pope Francis, obviously, he's a very busy guy, so it took us quite a while to get our interview with him. We brought four what we called voices of disenfranchised voices from around the world: voice of indigenous, voice of wildlife, voice of the poor, and voice of the youth. And we brought them to meet Pope Francis, so the interaction was mainly with them and him. He arrived 20 minutes early and left 20 minutes late. We had 80 minutes with the Pope, which I'm told is quite a substantial amount of time. And he was incredibly generous. And I think that his words to us were very powerful, but they were only just the beginning of our journey, really.
Obviously, one of the main topics, one of the main issues of this pontificate is preserving the environment, preserving creation. What are your hopes for this movie, for The Letter?
Well, I hope that I see the Laudato Si and Pope Francis's message a bit like a self-help message for all of us. We all want to know what we can do. And that's a tricky thing, and it's up to each individual to find what they can do to contribute to climate change, whether it's through their voting or the way that they behave, or indeed get involved in some kind of a movement to protect the planet, conserve biodiversity. It really is the greatest issue facing humanity. We know now that future generations will suffer if we don't do something and the planet continues to heat up. And as we know from science, any heating that has already existed is going to continue for centuries to come. So the urgency is there, and now we have some of the moral tools as well as the scientific tools to work together on this project.
And real quickly, before I let you go, what role do you think the Church has to play in preserving creation, preserving the environment?
The Church offers moral guidance, and I think ideas such as ecological sin or indeed ecological conversion, these ideas by which we look at ourselves as responsible for creation rather than just users and abusers of creation. Some of these deeper philosophical ideas that the Church has to offer I think, speak to the why do we care about the environment. There are a lot of technocrats out there who can tell you what to do and how to do it and how to recycle or put solar panels up. But really, the Church's role in instructing us as to why to do so is a much deeper question, and I think Pope Francis has really given us something that is prophetic and useful for everyone, whether you're religious or not.
Nicholas Brown, thank you so much for being with us. The director of the movie, The Letter, now available on YouTube. In Rome, Andreas Tannhauser for EWTN News Nightly.
And finally tonight, Israeli archaeologists say they have discovered what can truly be called buried treasure. It is a collection of 44 gold coins found in northern Israeli town near the border of Lebanon. The markings on the coins bear the images of two Byzantine emperors. Historians suggest they date back to the 7th century. They believe the coins were buried to hide them from a Muslim conquest which took place at that time in history. Amazing. Oh, thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sabol. Good night and God bless.